Let me introduce Kristine Dery, who is also affiliated with CISR and the Work of the Future initiative, and who joins us today from New Zealand. Kristine, over to you.
Ken, thank you so much. And Tom, as always, an absolute pleasure to be with you in an event like this, an opportunity to discuss the work of the future and to talk about some of the challenges that are ahead of us. And certainly we are looking to renegotiate what work is going to look like going forward. I'm going to share with you today, and let me just share my screen now, some of the research that we've been doing at MIT CISR, which looks at how we have been creating this employee experience over time. Now, we've been studying this for quite some time now, but obviously what's happened in the last few months with COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to look at this through an even tighter lens and to really try and understand what it is that we are trying to create in our organizations to build this, what Tom calls the social contract, and I've always loved his work in that area, but to really renegotiate how work is going to take place in order to build value both for the organization and for the employee. Let me just introduce you to our centre for just one moment. It's comprised of a group of companies that form our membership, and I want to thank these companies yet again for their contribution to this research. They've been very instrumental in both providing some very rich data and insights, but also in, I think, keeping all of us at CISR very honest and very focused on the issues that are really resonating with leaders right across the world right now in corporations. We study, as you can see, large organizations that are transitioning for digital, and it's in these companies that most of the research you're going to see now has taken place. Let's just sort of stop for a moment and look at what's happened over the last few months as we've kind of recreated and reimagined this roadmap to work. The first thing we saw was that companies had to become just connected and operational. And this is where we started to introduce a whole lot of standards. Most of those standards were initially about technology, how we were going to use technology, what capabilities we needed, hardware, software, how we were going to move people either into more remote work environments, working from home, which is what happened primarily with knowledge workers, and then in other spaces, how we were going to create safety and completely new work environments for those people. So it was largely about staying operational, being able to connect people in ways that made sense. But over time, as this has become a more embedded way of thinking about working, and this has continued on, and we're starting to reimagine life perhaps after COVID, or certainly continuing within this environment, we've started to create what I call the employee experience. Now, when I talk about employee experience, I'm really talking about how easy is it for you to do your work today and then reimagine your work of tomorrow. So there's a whole lot of things about well-being that Tom has talked about very eloquently that are incredibly important. But one of the important parts of this is how easy is it for me to do my work? Do I have the right skills, the right equipment, the right environment? Am I being supported well enough? Am I able to do what I'm good at and really be the best I can possibly be at it? And what we saw was this starting to emerge from a whole lot of different places in the organization, and it became quite chaotic as we tried to address the different needs of employees in different parts of our corporations. So for a number of companies, that continues to be these sort of constant iterations around trying to work this out. And finally, what we're trying to get to is we're trying to learn and gather data and gather information so that we can imagine and make some more informed decisions coming out the other side of what this environment and this renegotiated world of work is going to look like in our organizations. We have studied employee experience, as I mentioned, for some time. I'm just going to give you a brief insight into this work because I think it becomes an important framing for thinking about some of these issues going forward. What we have looked at is a number of large organizations, over 300. In fact, we have a study now that looks at a much larger group, over 1,000 organizations, to study how they rate in terms of the way that we think about employee experience. And it turns out that the top 25% of these companies perform very differently to the rest. They have twice the amount of customer satisfaction, so they're much better at serving customers. So by developing this new way of thinking about employees, they've become also much better at thinking about the needs of their customers and their ability to deliver their experience for customers much more consistently. They're also much more innovative. They produce double the amount of revenue from new products and services in the last 2 years. And the other thing is that they're able to pull out costs while they're generating this new revenue. So not only are we seeing new revenue streams, better ways of delivering capabilities to customers and building value from the organization, but also better ways of pulling out costs. Now, I think this is incredibly important as we move forward to thinking about this new world of work, because there is a great temptation to run at some of the easy ways to strip out costs, and yet what we're seeing is if we invest more in employees and in their employee experience, we have the opportunity to create this ambidextrous world where we're both building value and doing it much more efficiently. And I think this is this data and this perspective that took me to a point of saying, look, this thing called employee experience, enabling people to do their work more effectively today and empowering them to be able to reimagine their world of tomorrow, really does deliver value. So we have to pay attention to this. Employee experience is not just a nice to have, it really matters. Now, here's 3 things to note. Here's the first thing that companies have tended to go to in the last few years in building a new world of work. And that's this world, the physical world of workspace. As we all know, that has changed dramatically in the last few months. But here's what we see in our data is that designing these new spaces, whether they be physical, which is where we've tended to go in the last few years, or whether they be virtual, which is where we are now much more embedded and invested in creating and designing and curating this virtual world, it's not the answer in and of itself. As part of an integrated strategy around work and the workforce, it has enormous potential to add value. But in and of itself, we don't get any value from these spaces. So the first thing is, when we're thinking about workspace, think about this as a place that we're constantly iterating, we're constantly learning, and it's part of the way in which we think and design work overall. Here's the next thing, is that we have tended to build these worlds of what we call the culture of heroics. So our people are often running around compensating for systems that are not well designed, compensating for processes that are requiring them to do a lot more for our people than what the capabilities of the organization are enabling us to do. And in the past, we've rewarded these culture of heroics as being people who are enormously engaged, enormously willing to go the extra mile. This has been particularly evident in the last few months, where we've relied on a lot of heroics in order to get us to where we are. But the point is that what we know is that going forward is that the culture of heroics just starts to wear people out, destroy value. It's not sustainable, particularly in a digital world that moves so fast, that is needs to be so responsive to customers. We need to really rethink about the employee experience to deliver this more sustainable world and remove our idea of the culture of heroics as being an important part of that. And here's the final thing I want to say in these first 3 things that are really essential for us to think about is what we tend to do is we create this world where, instead of having these nice smooth roads to be able to work with and develop, create value in the organization, we build all these speed bumps. And over the last few months, some of those speed bumps we've been able to smooth. We've put more technologies in place, we've enabled people to do more things, but we've also added a whole lot of new ones. And these workplace speed bumps, whether they're technologies not talking to each other, business rules that don't enable us to do the things we need to do, an inability to raise the voice of employees to really know and understand what their key issues are, destroy value both for the organization and for the employee. So being able to focus on these speed bumps, what we've seen is companies that are more effective in delivering employee experience think about space as part of an overall integrated strategy for work. They are much better at creating work environments where the culture of heroics is not prevalent. Rather, we support and enable people to do the work that they need to do, but also be empowered to think of their work going forward and contributing to that work. And also, we really focus, we have management that are directly associated with focusing on these workplace speed bumps. So before I continue, I just want to stop here, and we've got over 100 people on this call today, and ask you a few questions. So think about this. As we think about the future of work in our organization, where are we putting most of our efforts? Is it into new workplace technologies? And this is right now. New workplace technologies, is it around the space where work's going to be done? Is it about leadership and leading these more flexible work environments? Is it about the analytics that are driving our knowledge of people and our ability to make decisions around people? Is it the learning and development requirements of our organization, or is it some of these new accountabilities for deploying employee experience? I know we'll be doing all of those, but I want you just to think about where we're putting most of our efforts right now. And Ken, while people are thinking about that, is there anything in the Q&A that you'd like to talk about in a few minutes, that while people are thinking about the poll?
Yes, indeed. So while you were speaking about worker experience, what kind of organizational leadership would promote better worker experience?
So it's such a great question. And, I think that I'm going to address that when we, in the next few minutes, when we talk about what we've seen during COVID. Certainly what we are experiencing, and as we've been talking about a lot at MIT for the last few years, is these more distributed, flatter structures where leaders are able to really listen to the needs of employees. And when I say listen, that's using data from all sorts of parts of the organization. We've got much greater capability to gather that data now, but it's also talking more to people. And we've got more channels and more ways in which we can use technology to talk to people across these large organizations. So I think leaders who really engage in those capabilities are able to really understand more of the nuances and certainly get a handle on what I call the speed bumps that make it harder and harder to deliver a great employee experience. Can we have a look maybe and see what the results of the poll are? All right. So interesting that the focus here on technologies, and that's to be expected. I think that's been a big focus as we've started. I'm very pleased to see that leadership has become an important issue in most of your organizations, and learning. HR analytics, I think, are going to be increasingly important as we move forward, as we start to gather this data. And let's talk a little more about accountabilities as we go forward. But interesting to see that those three things dominate. And that would fit very nicely into what we have found in the last few months as we've been talking to organizations as they've been really going through what has been a really substantial disruption. Here's the things that we're aiming for. We want to get much better at both customer experience. We want to be more innovative, and we've got to do it in a more efficient way. If we think about this as a light aircraft, my brother is a farmer in New Zealand, so he drives a light aircraft that has a dashboard that looks a little like this, which is fitted very nicely with some of the research that we've been doing. What we're trying to do is keep this aircraft on the runway. We're trying to keep it moving forward towards the destination. And the employee experience is managed by a series of dials and levers. We think about it that way. Employee experience is a combination of both adapting the work environment to meet the needs of work. It's taking the work to where it needs to be done, but it's also constantly adapting the space, the technology, and the systems that enable people to work effectively. But on the other side, also this series of what I call collective habits. Call it culture if you like. For me, it's this collective series of habits or rituals that enable us to have different kinds of conversations, work together in different ways, raise the voice of employees, and respond to those more effectively. And we have a dashboard that sits in front of us we've identified over time a series of 6 levers and dials. There are 2 big levers that over the last few months have really enabled us to lift this aircraft off the runway and maintain both our operations, but also start to redefine and rethink about where we're headed and what kind of employee experience is going to take us there. And those are the 2 big levers of systems or technology, as most of our listeners defined in the poll earlier, but also in leadership and thinking about what kind of leadership does it take and how we pull that big lever of leadership to really reimagine what leading in these more hybrid work environments is going to look like. But I want you to keep an eye on the dial to the far right. And Tom also referred to this, which is systemic learning, embedding this environment of continual learning in the organization as we move forward, both individually and collectively, to enable us to think very differently about the world of work. What we've done is we've twisted that dial of space in some organizations much further from a co-located work environment to a more virtual work environment. But each of these levers is all interrelated. So it's the combination of the levers that enables us to take the aircraft down the runway and build the employee experience that we're looking for. Just quickly, I'm not going to spend too much time on these first 2, but what we've seen is this moving from employee connectivity to employee experience, really imagining what it feels like for workers to work in these new environments. So we've been doing a lot of work to empower people on digital capabilities. Some companies estimate that there's been a 5-year advancement in their ability to deliver these technology capabilities to their people in ways that previously had been very slow to develop, we'd been playing around with, but we really have made enormous progress over the last few months. So much faster technology to solve problems. There's been a greater tolerance for what we call minimal viable products, and most of you will be familiar with that. So just getting the technology out there, starting to experiment with it, starting to learn from it, but a much lower tolerance for slow response cycles. And I think that's going to continue as we move forward. So we have been looking at companies that have been really fast to now digitize as much work as they can in order to enable their people to work in these more digital environments. For some companies that were more advanced in their progress around digital transformation, this has been relatively easy to do. I use the word relatively very carefully. For others, this has been a massive step up. I love this quote that around these long-standing blockers, and I think this is the issue that we're really starting to see enormous opportunity, but then, as Tom points out, some really major challenges as we renegotiate the world of the future. But a lot of those long-standing blockers have been very quickly resolved. Companies much more willing to adopt the digital technologies around workforce and around the way people work, but also becoming much rapidly very skilled and capable of self-serving in terms of building their skills as they've moved forward into this world of more virtual work particularly. Paul Cobbin at DBS, which is a large bank in Singapore, the world's best digital bank, as nominated by a number of companies over the last few years, talks about this shift from hardware to hardware. And I think this is really what have been seeing around leadership. Companies that have been very effective in creating the employee experience or reimagining the experience of their employees over the last few months are using a lot more dialogue, less communication, more discussion. They're finding people are playing more out of position. Other organizations have been talking about the liquid workforce, this ability to move people around across different positions and into different roles. But what we're seeing is that this needs a lot more support, a lot more sense of community and sharing of knowledge, and the ability to get training to where it's needed much faster. And a lot of companies have been rapidly learning about how to do that in the last few months. And I think this is going to be an important part of their strategy going forward and an important thing to watch. Certainly a lot more empathetic leadership, and organizations really starting to understand that there have been some capabilities of leadership that have been not emphasized in the more co-located environment that have become incredibly important as people are working more virtually, and a real sense that that there is a need for leadership to really be checking up rather than checking in. Tom talked about the technologies that are designed to provide data on where people are and what they're doing at every given moment of the day. And while I think some of those technologies are going to be valuable going forward in terms of more data and more ability to make more evidence-based decisions, the capabilities of leadership in being able to listen to employees and check up and really start to understand what those speed bumps look like that make it hard for them to work or hard for them to engage with the work environment around them is going to be incredibly important. So using community to do that will be an important part of how we think about leadership and good leadership moving forward. And you can see from this quote, this is from a big retailer in Asia, that they've really started to understand the value of the empathetic side of leadership and are keen to grab hold of that and to embed it in some of the rituals of the organization moving forward that mean that hasn't just been a nice thing to have during COVID-19, but will be something that will change the dynamic of leadership in their organizations. And I find some of these things very encouraging, but also acknowledging Tom's point, we really have to be careful about how we think about this and how we provide the tools for this going forward. But here's the thing that the little dial that I said to keep an eye on. Over the last few months, in the research that I've been doing, I'm really starting to get insights into organizations starting to understand the value of being able to get learning into the organization where it's needed very quickly and using tools that they've never used before to be able to do that. So the speed bumps that I talked about becoming much more visible and also being shared, and companies being more open to doing that. And I think that's one of the things that we have to focus on going forward, is that speed bumps are important things to keep on raising and understanding and working at in order to enable a much better experience for employees. We're seeing employees start to unlock these new digital capabilities as they were given the permissions during COVID to do that. So this is really empowering employees, not just with the knowledge and skills, but also with the ability to make this contribution, to experiment with the technologies that they've got, and to start reimagining how their work could be done a lot better. Again, the virtual workspace, we talked about curating that, and Tom talked about that in terms of understanding how to engage in this more virtual work world, not just as a form of connectivity, but really how to build community, how to use the technologies in very different ways to be able to curate this space to meet the needs of work. And these new rituals and habits are starting to evolve in companies. The challenge is, how do we capture those and take them forward into the new future of work where they make sense, and enabling our people to be very involved in how those rituals are formed, and then how we embed them and make them part of what we do. And I think this is the experience that a lot of leaders are talking about right now. So the question is, how do we learn from the experiences we've had during COVID? How do we take them forward? How do we work out the ones that are really going to enable us to renegotiate this new world of work as we move forward into the post-COVID-19 phase, or even just the continual evolving of the crisis that we've been in into a more normalized way of thinking about how we take this very defining moment that Ken talked about and really make it count, not just in thinking about where people should be working, but how they should be working and how we enable a much better experience for our people in these more hybrid environments. So, Ken, I'm going to pass back to you now. I know that there's been quite a few questions coming forward. I really encourage you to think about these levers as we move into the new world of work, how they work together, and who's going to lead them and who's going to make some of the decisions around how we create this new vision for our employees.
So one question that came in is, with this huge increase in workplace technology and digitizing of work, is this the start of more workers being displaced by technology?
That's we're working in a world at the moment that's very unpredictable, and I think that there is some really natural fears and very real fears, as Tom pointed out, about people being displaced by all sorts of tensions in the workplace right now. With this huge rise of technology, and it's been really significant in a lot of organizations, of workplace technology. If we don't combine that with systemic learning, then there's a danger that we'll pull out the low-hanging fruit of that technology and displace people in ways that say they're no longer required. And instead of really learning about what the new world of work can look like and taking advantage of the fluidity of being able to move people around and retrain them, re-engage them in new ways of thinking about their work. I'll give you a great example of a law firm that I've been doing some work with over the last few months, who are really reimagining what it looks like in terms of the relationship between the senior legal partners and the people who typically support that work. And they've been able to rethink the nature of their support systems that they've got in place as their lawyers and partners have started to work more digitally and have picked up a lot of that workload themselves, created a new way and new efficiencies of doing the work that they're doing, but as a result, freed up people in the organization to do more research, to be more engaged in thinking about applying AI tools so that they can be more effective and grow the practice in new ways. So yes, there's some real fears around displacing workers for technology. That's always been the case. But as Tom mentioned, our ability to learn and create new skills will enable us to augment the workforce going forward, instead of creating just jumping at the low-hanging fruit.
Okay, so this is a two-part question. So someone has observed that managers are feeling, the word that was used was angry, I'll say uncomfortable, because they're finding that employees are now getting used to working at home or remotely and worrying about what will happen once the pandemic slows down. Because if they continue to work remotely, how can they ensure creativity, productivity, and innovation with all of these people working remotely?
So interesting. Every company that I've spoken to in the last few months, none of them have seen a decline in productivity. What they've seen is people using new tools to do things in new ways. They've seen this ability to unlock the capability of technologies in different ways, to self-serve, to be able to use the technologies to reimagine how you might work and how you might do things. I think there's been, in many ways, a surge of creativity around our ability to do certain tasks. Our challenge now is to listen to that surge and to harness it moving forward, and to move the discussion away from where work is done in knowledge work, whether that work's done from home, from the office, from wherever it's done, and really refocus on what the employee experience is. How do we enhance that? How do we support that? And how do we take this surge of creativity and innovation that we've seen over the last few months and harness it and move it forward in a way that's sustainable? A lot of the work practices that have happened in the last few months are not sustainable going forward. They are exhausting people. People are getting incredibly stressed by some of the practices that we've adopted just in order to survive. Now, as leaders, we have to start harnessing the good parts of that, and then really rethinking and taking advantage of this opportunity. And we shouldn't be restrained or constrained by by the location of where workers are, or where they're how they're doing their work. This is a huge opportunity for us. Huge opportunity to get people engaged in our work, in our environment, that we've never been able to get before. Bring people in from the margin. We've always talked about job sharing, new ways of creating new roles. We've now seen that there's enormous opportunity to do some of those things.
Okay, so perhaps at this point, let you conclude your presentation and then move to a discussion where we can pull in Tom and pose some of the questions that have accumulated to both of you.
Thanks, Ken.
One question that came up earlier, and I think my intuition is that Tom may want to address this. You mentioned some of the factors like ensuring health care, paid vacation, and so on. How do you address fears or accusations that this is introducing socialism into a capitalist economy?
Well, I think there's a lot of rhetoric about those issues, but the reality is that these are part of the social fabric, not socialism in a political sense, but in a community sense. If we are going to get work done today, then we are going to have to see our workforce as embedded in communities, in families, in social structures that require time, and that as we go through a life course, our requirements change. And so our children are all out of the house, and I work alongside young people with children at home. And I can do some things to compensate for their time constraints. And in return, if I have a time I want to be with my grandchildren, or I'm not healthy, they will come and reciprocate. So building community by having universal practices like sick leave and family leave is an opportunity for us to strengthen our bonds at work with each other and to make sure that the work gets done, but it gets done in a way that also takes care of our families and doesn't put people at work when they are sick, and then they are a risk to everyone, including their customers and clients, as well as their coworkers. So we have to get away from these old stereotypes about capitalism and socialism. We are a free enterprise economy, and our democracy is, and there's no movement away from that as we address these issues. And I'll say one other thing. Young people today don't want to listen to those kinds of stereotypical arguments about socialism. They see the need to have flexibility at work. It's a top priority for them. As they start their families, they see that even more, and they're going to demand more and more of it. So we just have to get on with it, but not be hung up by the old labels.
And Tom, if I could jump in there as well, if we want to break down what we're seeing in terms of empathetic leadership, a big part of that has been around leaders really getting an insight into people's life outside of work, and the way that they're balancing some of those tensions around work and life, and getting a much greater sense of the role that work plays in the overall individual's world, and then being responsive to that. So that's been a big part of what companies mean by empathetic leadership, and not just separating the world of work from our normal lives. And the other issue I'd like to comment on is we've done some research over the last year and into talent, and how organizations are attracting the kind of digital talent that they need for these strategies going forward. And employee experience building this world where people can be more effective in what they do, and that includes the kind of space that they work in, the kind of flexible work policies that they have, the projects that they have to work with, the capabilities and the learning that they're able to develop on the job, has a huge impact on an organization's ability to attract and retain that talent. And that digital talent is no longer tied to the corporation. Able to work as freelancers, gig workers, choose the nature of the relationship that they have with the corporation. And unless contemporary organizations, large companies that have been around for a very long time, that are very important to the fabric of our society moving forward, unless they develop that experience for employees that enables them to thrive, then it's going to be very hard and expensive for them to attract that and retain the talent that they need for their digital strategies.
So back to you, Tom, first, and then to Kristine. In order to move to this better place, this better model that you are proposing and that you've observed, what kind of policy leadership is required, and how could you institute it? First, in the case of the US, and then maybe, Kristine, you have some insight about how these policies and systems were instituted in other countries.
I spend just about every waking hour I have, and then sometimes in my sleep, trying to address those issues by doing exactly what we are doing here today, discussing them with a broad cross-section of people with different experiences, and some who may have very different points of view, but we can discuss them openly and respectfully, and then build support from the public up to the policymakers. Well, I've been unfortunately part of two failed efforts to change our national labor laws over the course of my career, one during the Clinton administration, one during the Obama administration. And one of the big reasons it failed is we left the debate to the interest groups of business and labor who were just at loggerheads and at impasse, and we didn't engage the public. The public didn't even know much about these other than what they might hear on the nightly news a little bit. What we have to do is to discuss them at the local level. As we move to elections now, ask all of the candidates, I don't care if they're Republican or Democrats or for our local House of Representatives or our state offices, our local offices, the Senate or the presidency, where do you stand on these issues? Because we need action to bring our country together. We can't have these deep divisions and lack of respect continuing in the future. That's not what we want to see our children experience and our grandchildren. It's not the legacy we want to leave to the next generations. So I think if we start to talk about them and then hold our leaders accountable, then we will get real change. If we wait for the leaders to in elected office to take the initiative, then we'll see again more polarization, and the issues will get framed in a polarized way. We have to frame the issues, have the conversation, talk to each other, disagree respectfully if we have disagreements, and then look for the common ground. Then we'll make progress.
Kristine, any comments, views, reactions?
Yeah, I mean, my view is much more around the organization itself. I think what we're seeing is different ways of thinking about how we lead organizations. And if we look at that model and take it then to a broader context, it may have some value. what we're seeing in organizations is this kind of command and control, top-down decision-making is no longer effective. It's not fast enough. It doesn't give us good answers. It doesn't create environments where people can really give of their best and be creative and innovative in responding to some of those solutions. So using technology to raise the voice of employees has been one of the most powerful things that organizations have been able to deliver. And what we've seen during COVID is an even greater focus on that. But you've got to raise the voice of the employees and then do something with it. And when you do something with it, companies are experimenting. They're forming these hypotheses. They're creating these experiments around new business rules, new ways of doing things, new technologies, new skills that they need to develop, and then trialing them and iterating. So rather than it being a big decision that has got a lot of risk associated with it, we're taking smaller decisions, experimenting, learning from those decisions, and then taking that data and insight and knowledge forward to the next step. And I think the more that companies adopt that, the more that way of thinking about how we make decisions more broadly starts to gain more traction and seems to be a much more effective way of moving forward. And certainly a way that appeals a lot more to the influences of tomorrow than the way that we've worked in the past.
Okay, so I'm going to change gear a little bit. Let's go back to the many workers who are not usually in an office environment or who are familiar with digital technology. What about the jobs of those people who are in manufacturing, or lately we've had the case of people in meat processing and so on? They're often low-wage jobs. How can we support those workers in the face of the pandemic who have to take additional risks? And how can we improve the work that they do?
Let me make a comment. I'm hopeful that the awakening of all of us to the important work that low-wage workers, that, like you mentioned, in hospitality, in meat packing and manufacturing, in supplying our food and in grocery stores, in healthcare for sure, that we now have an appreciation of how important they are, how valuable they are. We call them essential workers. We call them heroes. We can't forget that when this crisis begins to abate. We have to treat them with the kind of respect by paying them a living wage, by increasing wages, by getting wages moving for everybody again as the economy comes out of this crisis. That means new policies. Maybe it means that we have to engage even more in profit sharing in our corporations, and we create some incentives for profit sharing or for sharing broad-based ownership of businesses. It means that we have to strengthen worker voice so that they can have a seat at the table in distributing the benefits that they help to generate for business. It means that we have to rethink our tax policies in ways that make sure that the tax dividends don't just go to the people at the top of our economy. So we have to recognize that this is an awakening in the crisis, that these are valuable, essential workers. They deserve support now, and they're going to deserve our respect and our support going forward. If we don't, then we will see the kind of same uprising of low-wage workers after this crisis abates that we saw in the 1930s in the United States. And I'm not against growth in unionization, but we will have another wave of adversarial relationships in unionization. And we can do much better than that based on all of the work and all of the evidence and all of the best practices that have come since then.
Am I going too far in saying that I hear you advocating for things like universal health care and other parts of the social safety net that would be of most help to people in those jobs, in those industries?
Absolutely. We have to recognize jobs are a little bit less secure today, and people move across jobs. They should not lose their health insurance when they move across jobs. We have to slowly but surely wean ourselves off of this legacy employer provided health insurance system. It worked well from World War II up and through the 1960s when large companies and stable working conditions were in place. But it doesn't fit today's economy, today's workforce, and too many people are left out. And we've got to address that in some way. We can't do it all in one, magic wand solution. But we have to sit down and recognize that we've got to move toward that kind of universal coverage in a sensible but steady way.
Okay, again, to change things slightly, Kristine, is there a question that you would like to pose to Tom?
Tom.
I'm taking you by surprise.
Yes, but giving me a wonderful opportunity. Tom, you talked about new skills and learning, and I think this is going to be a really critical part of our path as we move forward into the new world of work.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me what your thoughts are in terms of who should be taking responsibility for the provisioning these new capabilities and opportunities to learn, and how do we make sure that those opportunities are distributed evenly across our community so everybody has the opportunity to participate?
Well, Kristine, that's a question right at the heart of our MIT Task Force on Work of the Future, and we will have a lot to say about that. But so I will speak my view. I don't speak for the task force. There's 20 faculty members on our task force, and as we all know at MIT, if you bring 20 people from the faculty together, you're going to probably get 40 points of view on any given issue. So I don't speak for my colleagues yet, but we will speak as a task force at some point. But we clearly have to make a commitment to a new form of lifelong learning, new forms. And that requires all of these parties. Business can't do it alone, because if we leave it just to business, you will get some very progressive firms, and you have many of them as part of your sponsors at CISR. These firms are doing their part. But then for everyone that's part of CISR and on your list and other companies, there are some that are not. And that's what we call a market failure in economics. That if I spend the money as a responsible employer to train all of my workers effectively, but then my competitor doesn't, then the competitor is going to hire them away. That means neither of us train as much as we should. So we need some incentives for firms to invest more, maybe human capital investment incentives, but we also need the educational consortia like we have at MIT, like you're doing at CISR, like the Leaders for Global Operations, what used to be Leaders for Manufacturing, where companies work together with the educational programs. Like we are doing so much now in online learning with our MIT X program, where we are working with community colleges. Employers need to be part of a community college network where they work with them to make sure that the community colleges have the right equipment to train people on the technology of today and tomorrow. And then the community colleges respond by having a curricula that really reflects the skills, both the technical skills and the social skills of solving problems, of communicating, of leading, of working in teams. Those are that mix of institutions working together is so critical. And that again is where we need to go as a society. If we can bring people together and use our common interests in having a more diverse as well as a more well-trained workforce, particularly those workers at the bottom whose jobs are going to be more affected by technology, but they are people who often can learn and given the opportunity, do learn. We work at Kaiser Permanente a lot, which is a big healthcare organization. They employ many people, many minorities, many immigrants from low-wage communities and they have a joint training program funded by a certain amount of money put aside for every work hour that's negotiated with the unions out there. And then they can train people who are nurses assistants to become licensed practical nurses, and then maybe move up to RNs. And they're doing that in large numbers now as technology changes, not just in the nursing area, but in the technical areas. That's the key, because there we have institutions working together to upgrade low-wage workers.
Right. I mean, I think this is what some of the things that we've seen as being really have really changed with technology is the democratization of the ability for us to distribute learning in very different ways. But then the other side of it is creating this sense of curiosity and this desire for continual learning and for building of new skills. And I think we're seeing companies like DBS, a lot of companies in Southeast Asia that I work with in particular actually are really working on creating this sense of curiosity or desire to keep on changing and keep on wanting to build new skills. DBS refer to a lot as learning by doing as being very important, peer-to-peer learning as being really critical. So creating very new ways of thinking about how we reward leaders and their ability to teach, as opposed to just their ability to lead in the more traditional ways. Creating space in organizations for peer-to-peer learning to take place, and online environments for knowledge sharing in really tangible ways where people get their hands around some of these problems. I think are some of the issues that organizations are really grappling with right now.
Okay, well, we're running to the end of the time, but before we go, I'd like to ask both of you very, very briefly, maybe 30 seconds, what advice or what questions should we be asking, all of us, as we return to work? What should we be looking for? What can we do?
Kristine, why don't you go first?
I would be asking, what have we learned? What data can we collect? What information, what knowledge can we gather from our people to really listen and learn about what the work of the future should look like?
I think that's excellent advice. And I'll build on it by saying, let's then process that information together, because collecting the information is the first step and listening to each other. But then the creative part that comes with ideas, when people are energized to work together, just is more than any one of us or any small group of us could ever come up with solutions and with creative ideas. And then people own that solution or those solutions, and then they're even more motivated to continue that process. So let's get that engine of innovation, collective innovation in the best sense of that term, moving together to address these problems that have been identified. We know what the problems are. They have been raised and made clear by all of the activities and all of the experiences we've had. Let's now put those lessons to work, just the way Kristine said, and then make sure that we collectively own the solutions.
Well, on behalf of MIT Industrial Liaison Program and our audience who are listening in, I want to thank you both sincerely for your wonderful insight in addressing the concern that many of us share. We thank our audience for their participation and their interest. More information about future webinars and about the Industrial Liaison Program is on our website, ilp.mit.edu. At this time, we'll leave the chat feature open and invite our audience to leave us comments and thoughts about this webinar. Thank you all very much. Stay safe and be well.